Welcome back, folks, for a new episode of Lead. And today we'll cover the biggest of them all, the Tier 9 and Tier 10 Type 2604 and 2605 of the Japanese heavy tank branch. Now, if you haven't watched my previous leak videos about the Mitos or the OIs, I highly recommend you watching those videos first because you get a better sense of where the Japanese heavy tank designs are going with, or how to play or utilize these heavy tanks to the fullest. But today, it's the biggest, it's the baddest, it is the high tier big boys of the Japanese monstrosities. So the Type 2604 and 2605 are based on the OI tanks at Tier 7 and Tier 8. They have even thicker armor, weighs about 50 tons more, no more useless mini turrets, so those small mini turrets are gone, and they mount an even bigger turret with a bigger caliber cannon. So these tanks are monstrosities and could compare to the E100 or the Mouse. These tanks are pretty huge. So no more delay, no more waiting. Here are the steel mountains of a tank, the Japanese high tier endgames. And here is the Type 2604 at Tier 9. Now the only surviving remnants of this vehicle are found in blueprints and photographs. But here is a picture of the turret being used as a coastal defense gun. It is taken by the Russians. This guy is not impressed, and this guy is like, bitch please. So it is a very, very big vehicle. Here is a comparison with the same tier AMX 5120. As you can see, the 5120 is mediocre in size in comparison. The 5120 is not that small of a tank, but yet, in comparison with the Type 2604, it looks rather average. So this is a steel mountain of a tank, and it will attract a lot of artillery players, so artillery magnets, that kind of sucks, but oh well. Here is the height of the 2604. As you can see, it is very tall, so it can overmatch roof armors of most tank, like IS-7s or IS-4s. That's very good. And here's a lineup of all the Japanese heavy tanks with the Type 91, Type 95, the Mitos, the OIs, the 2604, and the Mouse. The Mouse is obviously German, so it's a comparison. But I don't want to spoil it just yet. The 2604, however, is actually the biggest Japanese heavy tank. You might say, why is the 2605 not the biggest? Well, I'll get to it when we get to it, so keep your pants on. I won't spoil it, but just note the 2604 is actually the biggest Japanese heavy tank. And here is the collision model with the non-textured model for the 2604. As you can see, the frontal hull for the 2604 is 250 millimeters. That's super thick. The turret could go up to 270 millimeters. It doesn't have a matlet, but it doesn't need one because 270 millimeters, a little bit sloped, is roughly 300 millimeters effective. That's crazy thick. We can just check with this armor calculator. So 270 millimeters. Angle is, let's say, 80 degrees for the turret. 80-ish, okay, 80, 75. 75, okay. That's, oh, never mind, 280-ish. I overestimated, but oh, it's still very thick. 280 millimeters is no joke, so you won't penetrate the frontal turret of this thing. The frontal hull armor is 250 millimeters, slightly sloped, so that will give you about 260 millimeters effective. The upper glacis is 150 millimeters, very well sloped at about, let's say, 30 degrees. Here's a better shot of the angling. So that's about 30-ish, right? 30-ish, 20-ish. That's insane. It's almost the same as the IS-7's upper plate, so 150 millimeters, sloped at 30 degrees. That's about 30. It should be like 25-ish, right? Okay, let's say 30. Little nerf for a full measure, but that's 300 millimeters effective. That's crazy thick. the frontal hull will not get penetrated by most shots at tier 9 and tier 10, unless it's like the tier 10 tank destroyers with like 300 millimeters of penetration, and that would even have a hard time penetrating this thing. It's crazy thick. Now it does have weak spots, like the lower glacis with this plate right here, which is about 100 millimeters, and the cheeks are only 200 millimeters, with a cupola on top with only 200 millimeters. But let's talk about the weak spots. So the lower glacis is fairly small, so hitting this spot is very challenging, and it's sloped backwards as well, so I think this will not be a viable weak spot, so don't even think about it. The cheeks are only 200 millimeters as opposed to 250, but only 200 millimeters is still very thick, so it looks like it's sloped at 45 degrees with 200 millimeters. If this tank is unsloped against frontal targets, we have 200 millimeters at 45 degrees. Yeah, it's very thick. That's 280 millimeters effective. It's not the Porsche Tiger turn weak spot. That's not a weak spot like the Porsche Tiger, alright? Don't shoot that cheek. It's pointless. This is huge. This is so thick. And the side of the turret, as well as the cupola, is 200 millimeters. So you don't even have to angle this turret like the E100. The E100 has 150 millimeters for the side of the turret, so you don't even have to angle this turret to bounce a lot of shots. That's crazy. And the cupola is actually well protected in my opinion, because this tank is very tall. And when you have a tall tank, shooting the cupola means that most guns will have to shoot upwards toward the cupola, and the cupola is rounded, so that will probably bounce all shots shooting below it. So the cupola is actually pretty strong, and this tank has 10 degrees of gun depression, so it could go hull down with 270 millimeters of frontal turret armor. This is about 270 millimeters or 250. Oh, fine, let's say it's 250. That's still very thick, like an E5, and rounded too, slightly rounded by the looks of it. So as you can see, it is slightly rounded, so penetrating this frontal turret is very hard, as well as the frontal plate. This thing is a very hard nut to crack. It has side skirts to protect the side armor, and the side armor is 150 millimeters or 140-ish, so it's not that badly armored. You could go side scraping like a KV4. It's hard to kill this thing. It's very hard. And the turret has 200 millimeters on the sides as well as the rear. Don't even think about going through the turret. Just hit for the side armor and the rear of the hull. The rear is 150. Yeah, killing this thing will be a hard time for everybody, unless you're playing artillery scumbags, artillery bags. So here are the main stats for the 2604. Now it is a tier 9 heavy tank, but it has 2050 health. That's insane. That's 100 less than the IS-7. That's a lot of health. Engine power is 1200 horsepower, weighs about 106 tons, so the power to weight ratio is only about 7.5-ish. It's like the Mito 150 at tier 6, so it's not that fast. Top speed is 20 kilometers per hour, reverse is 10. It's black print terms of speed. Hull traverse is 22 degrees per second. Turret traverse is 18.8, so it doesn't turn that well. It's slow. Terrain resistance is 1.2 for hard, 1.3 for medium, 1.9 for soft. The soft terrain resistance is above average, but the other two is mediocre, average. View range is 390 meters, decent enough. Radial range is 780-ish, so it's standard, above 700 meters. Hull armor is 250 at the front, 140 at the sides, and 140 at the rear. Turret is 250 at the front, 200 at the sides, and 200 at the rear. Surprisingly, this plate right here is not space armor. It's just normal armor. so it's very thick, but it does not act like a space armor against heat shells or high explosive shells. That kind of sucks, but okay. Main caliber gun is 140 millimeters, has 250 millimeters of penetration, deals 600 damage, so it's just shy of the derp cannon on the E100. It's not as strong in terms of alpha, but has better penetration, so that's the trade-off. It can fire APCR, but the looks of it, for 282 millimeters as a gold shell. Rate of fire is about 3.5 rounds per minute with a gun rammer and vents. DPM is 2000 without those equipments, but 2200 with, so it's not that bad. Reload is about 17.5 seconds. Okay. Accuracy is 0.4 like the E100. Aim time is 2.78 seconds, which is slightly faster. Okay. Gun depression is 10 degrees with elevation of 20. It could overmatch roof armors and has the same penetration as the 128mm that's on the E75 or the VK4502B, so it's not that bad. Stock cannon is 127mm with 230mm of pen and 450 alpha. Not bad. Good stock gun. Relatively good in comparison to like the stock gun for the M103, which is the 105mm, so it's not a bad weapon for this tank. And here's a comparison with the average stat at tier 9. So here is the VK4502B. Let's compare the mobility first. So as we can see, the average horsepower per ton ratio is 13, whereas the 2604 is 7.5. So this tank is a bunker. It's not going anywhere fast. It's very slow. Hull traverse is above average, or above average of the VK4502, but it's below average by 5 degrees per second. So it does move a little bit better than the VK, I guess, in terms of traverse. Top speed is the same as a Black Prince, so it's slow, way below average by 20 kilometers per hour. Reverse is also pretty worst. Okay, terrain resistance is below average for the hard, below average for the medium, and above average for the soft. So average mobility in terms of swampiness or swamplands and muddy terrains, average. View range is below average by 5 meters. Radio range is standard above 700 meters, so nothing to compare there. Let's talk about the gun. Now, it's like the E100's derp cannon, but it has better penetration. So, penetration is not bad. It's only 3 millimeters less than the average, so that's very good. Alpha is very high, so 600 damage alpha is way above average. The DPM is below average by 100 damage. It's okay, fine, whatever. Reloads every 17 seconds, so above average. But it has crappy accuracy with the derp gun. It's a derp gun after all, so 0.4 accuracy, where the average is 0.35. Aim time is below average, but not much, by only 0.1 second. So that's surprising for such a big caliber cannon. And 10 degrees of gun depression, so that's very good. With the 20 degrees of gun elevation, that's very good. And the stock gun is also not that bad, so 230mm penetration is okay. It's decent to deal with than the M103, so nothing to complain about there. And the damage for the alpha on the stock gun is pretty fair, 450 damage, so okay, I'm fine with that. Basically, the VK, what am I talking about? The Type 2604 is better in terms of armor than the VK4502B, and this vehicle is more like the bunker aspects than the VK4502B, but it is very slow, super slow. When you're playing this thing, beware of artillery players, because the mobility of this thing means that it cannot shift, and if caught out by the Batchat 15558, he can auto clip you until you die. So this thing is a huge artillery magnet, but has a lot of armor. It's a bunker. So if you're patient, if you like slowpokes or snorlaxes, you'll probably like this vehicle. It's a hard nut to crack, and you probably catch a lot of gold shell coming your way, because whenever I play the E100, a lot of players will just switch to gold, instantaneously do it by switching to gold. So this thing is a gold magnet, it is artillery magnet, it's a XP pinata if they manage to penetrate you, but it's like a taunt button against enemy players. So that's very interesting. And here is the final boss, the Type 2605 at tier 10. Now this tank is slightly smaller than the 2604. That's because they reduce the size of the engine deck. They shave off extra weight, and therefore this tank is slightly faster in terms of power to weight ratio, and yet it has a very big turret like the 2604 with a gigantic gun. So this tank is even more deadly because it's slightly faster now. So this thing is scary. It's like a movable bunker, a faster bunker than the 2604. As you can see, this tank looks more like a Tetris T-shape now than the Chiri, gigantic Chiri shape. That's the 2604. So don't underestimate the size of this vehicle, even though it's smaller, quote unquote, than the 2604. Don't ram it, it's not a good idea. And it has a very big caliber gun, so it does tons of damage. Tons and tons of damage. So here are some comparison photos with the 2604 as well as the Waffenträger E100. As you can see with the 2604 right here, the 2605 is roughly the same size from top to bottom point of view, but if you look at the back, the engine deck got reduced, so it saves on weight and less target area in terms of surface area for the side armor, so less area for you to shoot at. But the front is roughly the same, so the size is the same. Sloping looks like the same as well. But here is a funny picture that shows what is shaved off from the engine deck. Basically a ELC AMX is being shaved off, the extra weight. That's kind of funny. But here is a comparison with the Waffenträger E100. As you can see, it's a very big vehicle. Now the Waffenträger E100 has the worst, absolute worst camouflage rating out of all vehicles in the game. This tank is even bigger than the Waffenträger. So does it mean that this tank have like super bad, negative camouflage rating? People will actually want to spot you if they don't have the view range to do so. That's what negative view range means. But yeah, it's a big target. So here are the collision models as well as the non-texture models for the 2605. As you can see, the frontal turret got buffed to about 280 millimeters now. So there are parts that are 280 millimeters on the front of the turret. The front of the hull is about 260 millimeters somewhere, so it's even thicker than the 2604. That's crazy. Has the same sloping on the hull, so it will bounce a lot of shots if they hit the upper glacis, and the middle parts and lower plate is very well armored, about 260 millimeters. So getting through this vehicle will be a tough time. Tough time. Side of the turret got buffed by 10 millimeters, so it's even thicker now. And the cupola is still 200 millimeters, so shooting upwards towards it will bounce all the freaking time. This thing is such a hard nut to crack. Now side armor wise, it has less surface area because the engine deck got reduced, so you have less spots to shoot at. It's even deadly, or more deadlier than the 2604. So this thing is harder to kill because there's less places for you to shoot at and more health. The engine deck got reduced, and surprisingly, it's not covering up the top of the tracks, so there's no armor right here. So therefore, if you hit this spot with artillery shell, it does half the damage than if you're shooting at the engine deck, which is right here, and doing full damage. So this spot is actually better for this tank when fighting or fighting under artillery shells. That's insane. And the rear as well as the side armor is still 150 millimeters or 140-ish, so it will bounce a lot of shots from lower tier tanks like the light tanks if you angle it a little bit. The overall armor protection of these vehicles is insane. Oh man. And here are the stats for the 2605. It's a tier 10 heavy tank, has 2,800 health, so this replaced the E100 for the second most health heavy tank at tier 10. The first one is the mouse, obviously. Engine power is 1200 horsepower. It weighs 150 tons. So the power to weight ratio is 8 horsepower per ton now. It's 0.5 better than the 2604, but it's still not as good as the E100. Top speed got increased by 5 kilometers per hour at 25. Decent. It's faster than Black Prince now. Reverse is the same at 10 kilometers per hour. Hull traverse as well as turret traverse is the same as the 2604 at 22 degrees per second and 19-ish degrees per second respectively. Terrain resistance is 1.05 for hard, 1.1 for medium, 1.9 for soft, so this is average-ish. View range is 400 meters. Radio range is above 700, so standard. Hull armor is 260 at the front, 140 at the sides, and 140 at the rear. Turret armor is 260 on the cheeks, 280 on this pseudo manlet, 210 at the sides, and 200 at the rear. It's 210 for this sloped cheek of the turret? That's insane. You don't even have to angle the turret to bounce a lot of shots. The gun is the same gun that's on the 2604. Has the same penetration, 250-ish millimeters, with 600 damage for the alpha, so chunky damage. Rate of fire is about 3.5 rounds per minute. DPM is 2100, so with a gun rammer and vents, this could go up to 2300. Reloads every 17 seconds or so. If you fit a gun rammer and vents, that would be 16.3.4-ish seconds, so relatively faster than the E100. Accuracy is not that bad, 0.38 for such a big caliber weapon, and 2.4 seconds aim time. 2.4. That's insane. Has 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. So this Leviathan, this behemoth, is somewhat better in terms of gun handling than the E100. Has more penetration, better accuracy, better aim time, and better gun depression. And the hull armor is somewhat better as well. It doesn't have the weak lower plate. The lower plate on this thing is 250, 260 millimeters, whereas on the E100 that's 150-ish. So that's insane. Now the side armor is not as well protected as the E100 because the space armor for the E100, but it's thicker, so that's a trade-off. The turret is very strong as well. Yikes! It doesn't have a mantlet though, so this is a pseudo mantlet. It's more like a armor plate that's 280-ish millimeters. It's very thick, but if people are shooting gold shells, they might penetrate. So it's a gold magnet, it's artillery magnet as well. That kind of sucks. But let's compare with the average stat for tier 10 heavy tanks. Whoops, get over here. So let's compare with the E100, obviously. That's the closest candidate to compare. Let's see the lower plate. 150-ish, slope downwards to 260, 250. So this tank has about the same lower plate, but it's even thicker, so it doesn't rely on the sloping. Hard to say, but the turret is stronger than the E100. so it's 280 millimeters as opposed to 250. Ugh. Alright, the mobility of this vehicle is not as good. 9.2 horsepower per ton ratio for the E100. Average is 13, so only 8 horsepower per ton ratio. Very slow, but it's faster than the 2604. Top speed is below average by 20 kilometers per hour, but it's also not as fast as the E100 by 5 kilometers. Terrain resistance is above average for hard, above average for medium, and above average for soft, so that's good, but it's not as good as the hard and soft or hard resistance for the E100. Medium is the same, it's better on the soft terrain, so it evens out. Okay, view range is almost the same as well as the radio range, so in terms of that aspect it's the same as the E100. Okay, but this gun fares a little bit better than the derp gun on the E100 because it has better penetration than the 235 millimeters, and the average is 250, so that's very good. However, it has less alpha, so that's a trade-off, and less DPM, so wah wah wah. But has better, well, the same accuracy. I thought the accuracy of the E100 is 0.4. That's likely due to the crew trading, I guess. But okay, accuracy is the same. However, the aim time is way better, 2.4 seconds. So you can snapshot with this gigantic derp gun. And the gun depression is better by 10 degrees, or 10 degrees in comparison to 7 degrees. So this tank could shoot down and overmatch the roof armor better than the E100. So this could shoot downwards into IS-4s, IS-7s, and just penetrate the roof armor or the top of the pike nose of those Russian tanks. But yeah, the 2605 looks slower than the E100, but more penetration and better gun handling than the E100. So this thing is like a gigantic steel mountain of a target. It's hard to penetrate this thing without gold shell, and I mean, it attracts a lot of gold players when you're playing such a heavily armored vehicle. Players would love to shoot at this thing, but they probably won't penetrate the frontal parts of the hull, and the engine deck is relatively small, so they will have a hard time, and this tank has a lot of health. So yeah, it's a bunker of a tank. It's a very big bunker. And there you go, folks, the tier 9 and tier 10 of the Japanese heavy tank line branch. Now, whatever you may want to call these tanks, Leviathan, Gargantuans, or Godzillas, these tanks are very hard to kill. They have a lot of frontal armor, a very tall stature, and a high caliber weapon to fight back with. So just imagine a platoon of 3 of these on the same team. This will change the meta game for the tanks dramatically, and I'm highly excited for it. So thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll do a leak video about the lower tiers, the Type 89, 91, and the 95 when the stats for the Type 91 comes out. But as always, I'm highly excited for these gigantic gargantuan beasts to come out. But thank you guys for watching. As always, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.